On this Tuesday night, on the run, the ferocious wildfires threatening communities in the Northwest Territories.
So I'm asking residents that can leave, please leave.
The only ways to escape and the military reinforcements. In Hawaii, a Canadian business owner's gratitude and grief.
We're blessed. You know, my family's okay.
The support pouring in from strangers. No rights, no freedom. 2 years into the Taliban's takeover, how Afghanistan is the world's toughest place for women and girls. And inside the mind of a monarch.
This is a printed manicule.
What a Canadian scholar's doodle discovery could reveal about King Henry VIII.
Global National with Donna Friesen. Reporting tonight, Farah Nasser.
Good evening to you. Thanks for joining us. We begin tonight with the wildfire emergency in the Northwest Territories and the desperate calls for people in the most at-risk communities to get out while they still can. Coordinating evacuations is challenging because some areas have no cell service. This map shows how trapped people are becoming because of the fires. Multiple highways are closed, cutting off the only roads in or out. That includes the town of Hay River, where the mayor says people's lives are at risk if they stay.
There's no gas, there's no food, no health or pharmacy in town. People need to understand that if they get in trouble or they need help, they have no way of contacting anybody that could help them.
Heather Yourex-West on the destruction and the threat of those fires.
The loss here is immense. Fire tore through the hamlet of Enterprise, a community of 100 in the Northwest Territories on Saturday. Nearly every home and business is gone. Half an hour up the highway, the mayor of Hay River fears they could be next.
We've got some breathing space right now. We had some rain last night. However, if things change and this fire starts running at our community, we have no way to let people know.
With the highways closed and cell phone service down, the situation in Hay River has become desperate. The mayor believes more than 500 people have defied the evacuation order, choosing to stay. The only way out at the moment is by boat or by air. Evacuees from Fort Smith and Hay River are taking shelter in places like Fort McMurray.
If you start to imagine the magnitude of the loss, if the worst scenario was to happen, right? The magnitude is big.
The Northwest Territories is dealing with one of its worst fire seasons on record, so the arrival of hundreds of Canadian Armed Forces personnel in Yellowknife Tuesday was a welcome sight. The city has also declared a state of emergency, with another fire to the northwest, just 20 kilometers away.
It's a serious situation, and the city, as well as the territorial government, federal government, and private contractors are working really hard on mitigation measures.
Protecting the city is priority one because in the north, large-scale evacuations are especially difficult, with limited access roads and long distances to go.
Because as I'm looking at the ground, like you see how damp, how just wet everything is.
On her Facebook page, Fort Smith Town Councillor Dana Ferguson said a break in the weather was giving her hope. Though smoky, for now, the community of about 2,000 remains intact, even if its residents have been forced hundreds of kilometers away.
We have to come up with a new way of living so that we have a future for our children and our great-great-grandchildren to come, because Mother Earth right now is suffering.
What's become a summer of fire, taking a tremendous toll. Heather Yourex-West, Global News.
In British Columbia, more than a dozen daily temperature records fell on Monday as much of the province is in a heat wave. Environment Canada says BC had the 10 hottest communities in all of Canada yesterday. Lytton topped that list as temperatures there reached 41.4 degrees, the hottest temperature recorded anywhere in this country this year. Heat warnings are in place for much of BC and into southern Alberta. In Calgary, outdoor watering restrictions are now in effect as levels in the city's Bow River are said to be at their lowest in more than 100 years. In the U.S., President Biden says he will soon visit the island of Maui after last week's devastating fires that razed Lahaina. The number of dead has now reached 99. Hundreds are still missing. As search crews have combed through 25% of the disaster zone, officials say they're also working hard to identify more of the dead that have been found.
I understand that people want numbers. It's not a numbers game. Right now we're at 99 souls and families, so we're going to continue to do that.
Among those already identified, 4 members of the Tawney family, including a young boy, were found in a burned car near their home. And the remains of Frankie Trejos, who was helping neighbors during the disaster. He was found shielding his roommate's dog. And as survivors grieve the loss of their loved ones, many evacuees are desperate to return to Lahaina. Neetu Garcha is on Maui. Neetu, are authorities allowing residents back into town?
Farah, access to Lahaina was briefly reopened, spurring a scramble for access through police checkpoints like this one behind me. Some residents are still not able to get to their homes, which survived the fire. Authorities here say about 2,000 housing units have been secured for those who are displaced. Among them is a Canadian business owner and his family.
2 of the dogs that got taken in the ocean and one's got burns on it. So.
Canadian Don Prestage has lived on Maui for nearly a decade, building a life with his family and multiple businesses, including 2 restaurants, a retail store and a boat shop in Lahaina, all of which burned. He says 6 of his buildings, including this coffee shop, were obliterated.
I think the wind was so high and the fire was so hot that it really left nothing. It's pretty hard to grasp. The pictures don't do it justice.
Prestage says several of his 140 employees are facing significant loss.
I have an employee and she's only 21 and she lost her cousin in the fire. And so she's 21 years old and she's really got to support 5 people and pay for a funeral.
Against the backdrop of such loss, Prestage says there's been an overwhelming amount of support from fellow Canadians.
I didn't even have to go further than one person from Calgary, and he wired funds today to support her. We're blessed. You know, my family's okay. Our house will eventually get back to it. We're okay.
Prestage snapped these photos before the inferno forced him to flee.
It started out with just trying to make sure we knew where everybody was and that they were safe.
He says his home, vehicle, and family all survived. They're now staying with friends. They also have business operations in Oahu. He says he's thankful and trying to support his staff.
It's a community that I love, and so it's devastating.
Parts of Maui are in severe drought, not including these structures which burned down. Hawaiian Electric says power has been restored to a majority of affected customers.
Hopefully, once we understand more what the state and the county is going to do, we can build our plans around that to have a future again one day.
Hawaii's governor said the fires were a natural disaster and it's unlikely much more could have been done. But we have heard outrage from locals here. They say authorities failed to provide warnings, a clear evacuation plan, and timely help from first responders. Farah?
A lot of questions in the weeks ahead. Neetu Garcha in Maui. Thank you, Neetu. Canada's inflation rate is once again on the rise, reaching 3.3% in July, according to Statistics Canada. Last month's rise is up from the 2.8 year-over-year increase seen in June. The federal agency says the rise in July is largely due to an increase in gas prices across the country, a continued rise in food prices, and the soaring mortgage interest costs, which saw a 30.6% spike in the past year. The latest numbers push annual inflation outside the Bank of Canada's target rate. Anne Gaviola reports.
Prices at the pumps, as well as growing mortgage costs tied to higher interest rates, drove inflation higher in July, reversing a trend of cooling inflation.
In June, when we saw that rate fall to 2.8, it was like, oh, okay, great. We're back into the range and we're headed towards that 2% target. And of course, this does deviate from that trend.
That increase in food prices at grocery stores was mainly because of prices for fresh fruit and baked goods. The silver lining, that was the slowest pace of food inflation in more than a year. And airfares tumbled 12.7%. Still, the cumulative effect of sticker shock is hitting household budgets.
When we compare prices this year to last year, it might look like inflation have gone down, whereas for families, for households and businesses, prices are still very high.
The Bank of Canada has said it takes many things into account for interest rate decisions: inflation, the job market, economic growth. That includes the impact of higher rates on household budgets and debt. For now, the majority of economists don't foresee a September rate hike.
It takes between 18 and 24 months for interest rate hikes to fully ripple through the economy. And we just had another hike in July. So I think September, they're not going to hike.
When they're looking at how they should respond to inflation, they realize that there's some factors that they control and some that they can't. And one of the factors that they don't have any influence over, at least themselves, is, the global price of oils.
The price of oil is expected to moderate this fall, and there are signs of a cooling economy already in the labor market with a rising unemployment rate. Anne Gaviola, Global News, Toronto.
Police have arrested 2 more people linked to the shooting death of a Toronto mother last month. A 23-year-old former community health worker has been charged with accessory after the fact and obstructing justice. A 20-year-old man is also charged with manslaughter, robbery, and failure to comply with probation. Carolina Hubner-Makarat died after being hit with a stray bullet from an altercation between 3 men. The third suspect involved is still at large. A 32-year-old man was charged last month. Members of the military can now take harassment and discrimination complaints directly to the Canadian Human Rights Commission, bypassing the Canadian Armed Forces internal process. The policy change is effective immediately, and it comes after rampant sexual misconduct allegations, including against top military brass. The changes follow recommendations made by former Supreme Court Justice Louise Arbour's damning report last year, highlighting the military's mishandling of misconduct cases and failure to recognize its culture of abuse. A grand jury in Georgia has indicted Donald Trump and 18 alleged co-conspirators on 41 counts.
Hello, ma'am. Thank you.
This is the moment an Atlanta judge received the indictment over a suspected plot to overturn the 2020 election. It is the 4th criminal case against Trump, but this one is different. These are state charges being prosecuted as an organized crime case. As Jackson Proskow reports, instead of a mob boss at the center, it's a former president.
The sprawling indictment alleges Donald Trump and his allies knew they had lost the 2020 election and joined a conspiracy to unlawfully cling to power.
The defendants engaged in a criminal racketeering enterprise.
District Attorney Fonnie Willis alleges the group undertook 161 separate actions in their scheme, including alleged tampering with voting machines, slates of fake electors, and a brazen pressure campaign on state officials that continued for nearly a year after Trump had lost.
I just want to find 11,780 votes.
She doesn't have to prove that Trump was actually engaged in any of the activities that were criminal. It's just that he's part of a criminal organization.
Alleged co-conspirators include former White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, Trump lawyers Rudy Giuliani and Sidney Powell, and a former top official at the U.S. Justice Department.
I think many of those people, when you look at this down the line, not today, but down the line, will have cooperated.
Witnesses and evidence are likely to overlap with the solo federal prosecution of Trump in Washington over election interference. Georgia could be more problematic and chaotic, with all defendants tried simultaneously.
The scope of her indictment is unbelievable. Remember, we've got 19 defendants. We're going to have at least 19 lawyers.
A single criminal charge against a former president would have been historic. Trump now faces a staggering 91 felony counts across 4 different cases. Through it all, Republican voters have stuck by him, believing, as they did with his election lies, that he is the victim.
Jackson, these are not federal criminal charges, so how could things unfold differently for Trump compared to other cases that he's involved in?
Well, Farah, a state-level prosecution will play out very differently for Mr. Trump. He will all but certainly have a mugshot taken. The trial is likely to be televised. And the key difference here, if he is ultimately convicted, he cannot be pardoned by any future president or even by the governor of the state of Georgia.
Jackson Proskow in Washington, thank you for that, Jackson. Deadly blast caught on camera. An explosion rocks a Russian city. A Russian missile strike damaged more than 100 homes and a kindergarten playground in the Ukrainian city of Lviv. At least 15 people were wounded, including a 10-year-old. The city is close to the border with Poland, far from the front lines of the war. This video shows the moment a blast tore through a gas station in Russia Monday night. At least 35 people were killed, including 3 children. Officials say the fire started at a car repair shop on the side of the highway. It took firefighters nearly 4 hours to put out the blaze. And a powerful explosion near the capital of the Dominican Republic has killed at least 10 people. The blast happened Monday in a bustling commercial center about 25 kilometers west of Santo Domingo. Dozens were injured and crews are searching the debris, which is still smoldering in some places. There are 11 people that are unaccounted for. The cause of the explosion is still under investigation. Rights removed ahead the struggle of women and girls in Afghanistan since the Taliban's takeover. The Taliban is celebrating 2 years since U.S.-led troops were forced out of Afghanistan. Armed soldiers and supporters waved flags and blasted music in the streets. But women and girls were far from public view. In the first press conference after the takeover, the Taliban claimed women would be very active in its society. Of course, that didn't happen. And the lives and hopes of women and girls have shrunk even more. Today, in the final part of our series on life under the Taliban, Shagufa Danish looks at what it's like to be a woman in Afghanistan.
Education is a red line. That is their protest chant. Ruqya Sai led the demonstrations. Afghan women marching against the Taliban's brutal regime and risking their lives in the process. Taliban fighters have threatened us, she says, beaten us with sticks and tear guns. Since seizing power, the Taliban has deprived more than 2.5 million girls of an education, including Sai's daughter. She escaped to Pakistan with her 2 children. In the past 2 years, women have been removed from society, she said.
We have a country in this world where women and girls can't go to school in 2023.
When asked if girls would ever be allowed to return to the classroom, a Taliban spokesperson refused to answer. Domestic issues belong to Afghanistan, he says. Women are not only banned from learning, they are forbidden from most jobs, even for aid organizations. In a country gripped by extreme poverty and facing a humanitarian crisis, women are banned from public places like parks, and last month the Taliban ordered beauty salons shut down.
This is all women who are losing one of the only spaces that was left, that was available to them, where they could go and speak with other women, get advice, get support.
Getting support in Pakistan is difficult for Sai. She is a widow and is struggling to find work. The Taliban killed her husband, a former member of the Afghan Air Force. I don't feel safe here, she says. The United Nations estimates it will take 300 years to reach gender equality around the world, since there are still some places on earth, like Afghanistan, where women are being erased from public life. Shagufa Danish, Global News, Ottawa.
Regrets? I've had a few. Next, what newly discovered doodles tell us about the mindset of one of the most brutal monarchs in history. A koala named Matilda is sticking with the home team, predicting Australia will triumph over England in the FIFA Women's World Cup semi-final. And she's since proven to be a good luck charm after successfully predicting wins over both Denmark in the round of 16 and France in the quarterfinals. An Ottawa professor has made a remarkable discovery that's filling in some blanks about an infamous king, Henry VIII. Historians have long pored over his reign, including the lives and deaths of his 6 wives. It turns out academics missed something the monarch left behind, something that went undetected for 5 centuries. Taria Isri explains.
In the life of Britain's most notorious king, it seemed everything had already been written.
Henry is enthroned here, looking very confident.
For 500 years, part of the story remained untold, until Carleton professor Micheline White stumbled upon a series of doodles.
I was about to leave, and I thought I really should look at every page.
White was at Britain's Wormsley Library, researching the religious writings of Henry's last wife, Catherine Parr.
And all of a sudden, totally unexpectedly, I saw this little hand.
The little hand, or manicule, is an annotation, seen here in a Bible from the 1500s.
This is a printed manicule.
The one White found was faint, but she recognized the penmanship immediately.
These look a lot like Henry VIII's.
They were written next to passages like these. Turn away thine anger from me, that I may know that thou art more merciful unto me than my sins deserve.
It's clear that Henry is anxious and thinking about his physical suffering, and he's worried that God is punishing him for his sins.
Henry is of course known for his brutality, beheading wives who displeased him and advisors who questioned him.
We see the paintings and the portraits, but to really get a book or writings that tell us what they were thinking and feeling at the time, it is very, very rare.
Through her detective work, she has shown that this is actually Henry VIII reading the books that his last wife, Catherine Parr, produced.
For White, it also highlights the extraordinary role of Parr and the influence of her writing.
He valued this book so much that he treasured it, he kept it.
The inner thoughts of an infamous king, now a documented part of history. Taria Isri, Global News, Ottawa.
And that's Global National for this Tuesday night. I'm Farah Nasser. But before we go, an update on a fierce bidding war for a one-of-a-kind costume. This Donair suit was created in 2015 for the Alberta government for a traffic safety campaign that was eventually scrapped. But the province put it up for auction. The winner of the appetizing attire, Edmonton restaurant chain Primetime Donair and Poutine, paying $16,025. Until tomorrow, take care of yourselves and take care of each other. Good night.